Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel, and today I'm sitting down with Lauren and Eric from Privateer Press to discuss the big news about Warmachine MK4. So it's great to have you guys on the channel with us today.
Great to be here.
I suppose the big question that everybody will be asking is sort of why now? What's the big motivation behind a 4th edition of Warmachine?
Well, truthfully, there's lots of reasons. One of the major ones, and sort of the driving force behind it, was trying to make the game exciting and inviting for new players to enter, reducing the quantity of rules and models that you had to understand and purchase in order to have a fair shake at learning and playing the game against others. But additionally, we really wanted to reinvigorate the existing community, and with streamlined play and faster gameplay, a lot of points of reducing friction and moments of argument and discussion in order to resolve things, and just adding new unique elements to offer a fresh experience. In the process, we identified the importance of having a safe harbor for these new players, and that directed a lot of our decision making to not really being possible with a Mark 3.5, for instance. It was going to require something brand new in order to achieve all of our goals.
There's a big catalog of miniatures there, I suppose, where it can be daunting for new people to sort of step into it as well.
And it's hard for them to see the threads of interaction across all of those models and how they connect. So when purchasing, there's many what people call trap purchases, where these two models simply don't efficiently work together due to the division of themes and how mercenaries work, or that there was another better model for what they were trying to achieve. And there were so many models to learn in order for that to allow them to start out, that we're sort of compartmentalizing things in a way to prevent that from being an issue in the future.
With the streamlining then, does the game mechanically feel like an iteration of the previous editions, or is there sweeping changes to the actual game at its core, or is it very sort of light touch on the mechanics and more streamlining how you approach the game?
Definitely for the core elements of the game, it will feel like the same game. I think the defining elements of Warmachine are its specific approach to the dice math and how things interact, with the strong bell curve of having reasonable ability to predict the results of your actions, and the sort of Rube Goldberg mechanism of chaining your turn together to have everything come together to cause something greater than the sum of their parts. And taking an approach of I go, you go, breaks that up much too heavily to sort of function and allow the game to remain at its core, despite it being looked at for some options just because that's a trend things are going in. As far as the actual changes we made and what makes it different from previous editions, simplification of units was like one of the biggest push and the biggest change that people recognize upon looking at the new system. Moving 10 models individually, sometimes 15, was not only tedious, and especially in a game that had a clock associated with it, people even avoided taking these units because it took too long to actually process your turn and have all these independent die rolls and interactions, as well as a lot of the fiddliness associated with having them move independently, affecting terrain differently, avoiding free strikes differently, and each model having different rules apply to it during its own movement independently of one another. Whereas now the units are smaller, and the movement system is I elect any model I wish to move in the unit, and then I place the rest of the unit within 2 inches upon completion of their movement. I only check for all of these things once, and I only have to place a handful of models compared to the previous numbers. That'll be the biggest thing that stands out to the average person. Removing arcs and facing is probably the next biggest change, where it was really a new player trap in many cases, between understanding where a model's facing, where he's looking one way, but his shoulders are looking another way, but I marked the base a different way, and the confusion of, oh, I can't see that guy, can I? Whereas experienced players, they played around with this and took that into consideration at all times, and it didn't come up nearly as often for them. But also the cognitive load of the burden on you for having to place everything, especially when terrain interactions or the models simply didn't allow you to achieve the exact placing you wanted. It added this extra fiddliness and points of friction and slowed down gameplay. Washing the game of it has not felt negative in any way after having many games under your belt. It's not something I've
so
ever...
So much nicer, just being able to drop them exactly where they need to be, not having to overthink it. It speeds things up dramatically.
Free strikes are another similar element in that respect, where they hurt new players more than experienced players in that how to avoid them, how to design your turn around addressing them in many different ways, and having the opponent resolve attacks on your turn in a clock-based game slowed things down. The passing back and forth became very awkward. And right now, the forfeit of your combat action is still very meaningful, but it doesn't require some of that breakup of the pacing of your turn. And it's something that you can more reliably plan upon. Whereas it's like, well, I should survive that free strike. And a lot of people like some level of predictability, especially in this game.
Yeah.
And we maintain that a little more with that decision. As far as positive additions that are big changes, the rack system for the casters, where at the start of the game, after seeing your opponent's list, understanding what you're up against, you get to tailor some of your caster's spell selections based upon what you're facing. This paired with our new command cards, which let you have a pre-assembled hand of 5 cards tailored to your army to fill weaknesses and cover gaps, pushes us much closer to having a single list type system. Not that we're going single list for competitive play just yet, but a player can bring one army to a game store and have much more reasonable experience playing into a myriad of different armies that offer different capabilities.
Takes out that rock, paper, scissors effect we were seeing in Mark III, which was a big problem.
Also for pickup games within a store, even not or tournament conditions, when you build a list previously and you were having to pick specific spells, and then you could find yourself at the mercy of essentially having a wasted slot because your opponents just didn't have what that spell was there to work against. So being able to tailor at the table is a really good change. I like the fact that it opens up more synergies within the lists.
Another big boost it gives is specifically newer players, where when they're building their list, they won't know everyone else's armies or capabilities as crisply or distinctly. And when they line up across from the opponent and find out what their opponent's models do, sometimes they have that moment of fear of, I don't even know how to play into this. I don't even know where to begin. And having cards and spell selections that can help mitigate some of the impacts of those failures in planning or simply lack of understanding and being new.
Even when they lose, even if they have a bad game and they lose, they immediately have a way to be like, oh, if I change up these elements in my list, I don't necessarily have to immediately go buy something, but I can just change a command card, change a spell, and it gives them a much more positive way to move forward and improve themselves.
Absolutely. And previously, if you look at jacks in an army, there were many different, yet often similar jacks that were slightly different with, or better with different casters. They had slight synergies here and there. With the new approach of a single jack coming with all of its weapon and head options, you're getting that same breadth of availability with a single purchase, and you'll never feel like I bought the wrong jack. I bought a defender I wanted Triumph for. I bought Hammersmith. I really should have grabbed an Ironclad. There's none of that because you can freely tailor and customize the jack to whatever you want it to do. And across all lists, across experience of gameplay, or even personal preference, whatever it boils down to. And even, you know what, my jack's 1.2 heavy. I can downgrade this one weapon a little bit. Now I'm tailored easily without having to change up the entire army.
That's also a little bit kinder on the pocket as well, not having to have a myriad of jack options on the shelf for very specific cases as well, which is always good for all gamers out there.
Another thing that helps the customization is jacks now all have effectively dual attack. They can all make melee and ranged attacks in the same turn freely. So previously, if a jack had 2 melee arms, it was often much better than a jack with 1 melee arm and 1 gun or something of that nature, where now you get the full combat effectiveness regardless of the loadout you choose. And that also opens up more options in construction and ability to apply that jack to another army. If they have a huge range defense, they're not a wasted big point sink. They'll still have melee capabilities that will function. Other small changes just across the board is AoEs and sprays function differently now. Rather than fumbling with templates and deciding with your opponent as one hovers over the table exactly where things are, things are simply measured in a straight line for a spray or a distance from the target for resolving the AoE. And we found that all of these are very easily adjusted and measured quickly as well, and without the floating templates and without the requirement to even purchase a template, which was another barrier of people going, you know what, I forgot my AoE. We're going to just have to try and figure this out.
It feeds in then to the new style of movement for units as well, when you're only having to move that one model and then the rest are into coherency around them. It's faster. The measuring for AoEs will be faster, and also then it means it's kind of up to you to make sure that you don't cluster too tightly in what I like to think of as the bunch of grapes formation. But,
correct.
Yeah.
Streamlining running speed to speed +5. This is important for in the past where we had to have a lot of spells and interactions affect movement value independent of speed value, or something simply pushing the pace too quickly on the board because every higher speed we gave something was 2 speed for the purposes of covering ground.
Sure.
This normalization brings everything more relatively in line for the pacing of the game and the speed you can put pressure on someone. And it mitigates some of the variability between different types of lists and the impact that causes. And it really helps slower models get up onto the board faster. And I find that the biggest advantage of such a system. Increasing melee inches from 0.5 inches to 1 inch minimum, much easier to measure. From experience, finding the 0.5, especially when the models have interaction and spines and arms and things covering each other, trying to reach the tape measure in and trying to figure out where that half-inch line was. 1 inch is not only common on a lot of widgets, but it's also just marcated, much easier to read by comparison. Yep. One that I really like is turning immunities into resistances. Now, if something was previously immune to fire, shutting down many list options or abilities to even harm in a model, it'll be resistant to fire, which is you roll 1 less damage die. So there's still game there, even though things will be protected against certain elements and types and still incentivize taking different options in your army. It doesn't shut down some options with, I'm facing this list and they're immune to fire, so I guess that's that. And I like changes like that in general that don't completely shut down strategies or models and options within the game. Other than that, it's a very similar game in stylization, in gameplay. The only things you really notice is it plays faster, smoother, and it'll take you a few games to figure out units and exactly how they apply themselves and understand their new threats and roles within the game. But once you have those down, and new players won't have that struggle because they have nothing to reference in the past,
sure,
it'll flow very smoothly.
It's fascinating stuff. When we're talking about units then, and I suppose broadly the factions as well, the new Mark IV, I've been thinking of it as having one set of rules, but 2 sets of resource pools that you can draw your forces from with Unlimited and Prime. Do you want to tell people a little bit about that? I know it's been a big focus for a lot of people in the community. In fact, even going back a couple of years, there were threads where veteran players were asking for something like this, where the amount of factions and miniatures would be trimmed back, which is not something you often see hardcore fans asking for. Sort of the idea of having less options to make the game more accessible is a different one to take, and the fact that you guys have stepped up and went, yeah, we're with you on this, and people have got legacy models they may still want to play with, but to get new people in, the restricted lists and factions for Prime is an interesting one.
When we set out to achieve the previously stated goals and knew we'd also be expanding the game and model count in it with the new factions that were designed around a lot of the new elements we were adding, it required a much more manageable and controlled format than what was present in Mark III. That any change previously often had a ripple effect across many lists, especially when dealing with mercenaries and minions, where you could easily be impacting 150 different casters' list construction. And some models were normally taken for free, so their point value almost didn't matter, so you had to account for that. Some themes applied differently. And if something added armor, you had to check every possible list for every interaction of, you know what, in 95% of the list it's fine, but that one it's wrong. And just the designing format and how to balance everything perfectly got so heavily layered and distinct that if we were expanding the game, we realized unsustainable. Like the playtest resources and evaluation resources required just to add one new model could be extremely intense. Disproportionate investment in time and resources was the big thing. With new armies, we knew we didn't want them to be these ever-expanding, cumbersome things. And we didn't even want to have that forced constant purchasing model either. We wanted the army to be refined. And we had previous positive experience with things like Crucible Guard and Grimkin, where it was a very tight army list. You still had a lot of different options to choose from, a lot of different ways to play them, but it didn't require that ever-expanding enormous library that a lot of the older factions had. When looking at maintaining parity between new and old, which we knew would be very important, we evaluated how many lists do we think we'll have reasonably for each of these new armies, and that would be, or factions, how many armies, and that would be probably start with 2 plus a cadre. And then we said, okay, then that's what the legacy should get in the same format. And with a similar model count, with similar amount of options, similar number of casters, some factions couldn't be divided that way. To divide Grimkin in half would just be to gut the poor army. So for more limited factions, we had to say, okay, they get all their models, because even getting all their models, it's still the same amount that everyone else is getting with their truncated lists. And by giving them more their full caster options, truthfully, it's the same amount of caster options relative by other faction, because Protector of Menoth, for instance, will get 2 armies of 3 casters apiece. Grimkin will get 1 of 6, and they'll still have the same amount of options to play the army with different casting styles without being divided. Now, at the same time, we knew we didn't want to invalidate anyone's purchase entirely, because we love our own game. We love everything we've designed, and we didn't really want to have to cut anything at the same time. So we knew that even though this is what we wanted for people to enter as sort of a safe harbor and a very controlled setting, we wanted everything to be playable against the new stuff and have its own rules. And that's where we had to develop this sort of partition line. Now, what made the cut was based upon when dividing the armies into 2 groups that had a similar number of models. Generally, it went along thematic threads. That's not to say we pulled the exact themes that pre-existed, but we tried to design them around things that looked like they coalesce nicely as a unified force and not be too hodgepodge. And the cadres are developed around the concept that some armies were built around certain support elements that you would take regardless, like Choir of Menoth or Paingiver Beast Handlers or something like that. And with so many models having their rules previously designed around those, we didn't want to try and reinvent the wheel on a lot of this stuff. So we allowed the cadres to sort of cover that base and allow access to many things that were sort of essential for the army to function previously. Now, the legacy format, where we allow everything, we want people to still have that free-for-all that existed more in Mark II than Mark III, truthfully, once the themes became so good you couldn't really play anything you wanted within a faction. And the legacy format allows you to use all your models however you want. And we're still going to try and make sure each model is balanced relative with each other. However, it will not have the same design focus. Whereas in Prime, we will only allow a mercenary to work for 2 specific armies, for instance, as opposed to work for everybody. And so we won't be building things into that old system to try and maintain that in the same way. In Legacy, many people who have previous Legacy collections will have an advantage often over the newer players, because whereas the new player will have 35 models to choose from for their army, a Legacy player could have 150 to choose from for their army, and many different play styles, many different things, and attack it from many different angles. And that can be daunting and overwhelming as a new player to try and wrap yourself around. and helped additionally justify our whole partitioning system and control system for keeping things in parity and in a strong competitive relationship to each other, where one change didn't change so many other models.
Was there was an awful lot of previous factions from the vanilla to the individual sort of armies within them. You've trimmed it down to 2 per, which still leaves 30 or so sort of options for people. Was the decision behind which ones made it through to Prime and which ones were going to end up sort of being legacied a difficult one, or was it relatively easy to go, this works better for a new player and thematically feels like what a Signar or Khador army should be on the tabletop? Some
armies were very easy. It was such a simple decision. It was spelled out in plain as day. Mm-hmm. And some armies we really struggled with in order to maintain that. Sure. Where some have 3 sort of equally defined themes, or they have 2 really heavily defined themes, mm-hmm. and one that was really cool and popular, but not big enough to really make into a prime army.
Yeah.
And some of that was painful, where we didn't want to exclude it, but there was simply no place without bloating the model count or disrupting the whole idea mm-hmm. of having the strong parity between themes. And it became down to whatever the 2 most established, strongest thematic armies were within a faction, and how well they functioned by mm-hmm. themselves without the other elements.
Like Signar, it's hard to choose between Trenchers, Storm Knights, and Gun Mages. All of them are so powerfully thematic to the faction.
Sure.
But when we looked at it, Gun Mages just didn't have the unit variety and mainstays to make themselves a viable army all by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
The other options just had so many choices. So.
Yeah. I suppose then at that point, they settle better into potentially being part of one of the other armies, or becoming a cadre that can then sort of spread their love throughout the rest of Signar's empire.
Exactly.
So what are the entry steps then for a new player getting involved? It seems like it's going to be very targeted, I suppose, is one way of putting it, that you don't have to look at this massive catalog and try and navigate your way through. It should be much more accessible and easier for a complete novice to pick up.
Yeah, we really focused on accessibility as the main part of making it easy for new players to join. One of the first places we started, and one of the first places we hope new players will start, will be with the app, which is completely free. The rules are completely free. All the model rules are completely free. So a new player can take a look at both the rules and the models to see what fits them best before they even make a purchase. From there, every army will have an army box to start with.
Mm-hmm.
So they will have a very easy starting point to jump onto. And those army boxes will be 50-point lists, which are exactly where you want to start to play the game. That's the normal army size. So it's basically all in one right
mm-hmm.
from the get-go. And they will get to make choices from there on how to expand as we release stuff. But it'll be very easy to begin with.
Yeah. And then presumably once they've got into it, and the 50 point is sort of a halfway step over the sort of the tournament standard or standard size game, is there incremental purchases that they can build up on, or at that point will they be back to sort of single blisters and the like?
There will be incremental purchases to go from. There will be a couple single blisters for like maybe they want to buy a separate jack, or maybe there's a centerpiece model that is just big and cool and they really want. But for the most part, there will be just similar boxes where it's just a next chunk up to expand.
Yeah, so they can sort of easily step from one box to the next box to a completed army in a very, very few purchases, and a very gentle steps between them.
Yeah, really takes down that analysis paralysis of where to go next. And that's one of the things we wanted to simplify and streamline considerably.
Another thing, as you pointed out, the competitive level. We intend to support lots of different point levels in this game, and Mark IV specifically, where it won't be, it's 75 points and that's that. We intend to have events and support for things such as 50 points And within that 50-point army box, due to the rack system, command cards, and optional arms, it won't be every army is exactly the same. We'll have options within that box. The main thing, though, is the app is completely free, has everything you could possibly need to play as a resource. So you can really test things out in advance, and there's no punishment or investment on your end in order to do that. You can get a full idea of what is available from all the different armies and how they interact, if one box is better for you or not good for where you're going with the army. And you can just do it without any investment, which is great over a lot of similar games that require you have to buy some sort of army list to even have an idea of how it plays before making a purchase.
Yeah, you can, I've noticed you can download locally your army lists, but it's only if you want to start sort of hosting dozens of lists in the cloud that you can access wherever, that you need to look at even thinking about getting the subscription. Otherwise, everything is available right off the app without any additional purchase.
And there will be some subscription for like additional content, but that's just like hobby articles and some lore drops. We're not planning to bar anything intrinsic to playing the game behind those systems.
Which is great to hear. So with the new players out of the way, what do you think the big draws will be for veteran players to move across into the new edition of Warmachine?
I think there's several. So everything old is going to be new again. And that often just a new way to play with your toys, like a new way to think about the list you've always had. In some cases, it's scary because you carefully curated and built this list to function one way. And now that might be undermined by rules changes. However, generally people don't only just that one list, and being able to look at old models in a completely new light, because as we're going through, we are trying to bring up models that previously didn't function as well and really go for a strong, tight balance system between things, which we always did, to be fair. But now with a new lens of how things are partitioned and without the theme force, bonus points, and in the new prime lists, you don't have the same type of access to mercenaries. So the list needs to cover its own bases, so to speak, as opposed to relying on mercenaries to fill different gaps and roles. But the addressing of speed of gameplay, reducing friction, and reducing the cognitive load, and ability to minimize previous bad matchups. I think a lot of the things that had people drift away or groups sort of dwindle or get tired and stagnate have been completely altered and reinvigorated with a lot of these changes. Also, we're really trying to get new players to pick this game up. And I think there'll be a lot of fresh faces based on what we've seen picking up the game. And you'll have new armies, like passionate new individuals, reinvigorating local communities, new opponents to try different strategies against. And many people fall into the rut of playing against the same people over and over, and they sort of know how it goes. But having new opponents and new fresh faces always enlivens things.
Are there any major plans to get this in front of new players, to widen that pool through the likes of demos or organized play? Because when people walk into a game store and they can see a book and see boxes on the shelf, then you get the occasional person will start flicking through and go, "Oh, this looks interesting." But with the move to the app, I'm wondering if it's going to require more sort of feet on the ground approach to get the influx into it.
Well, we do have some plans as far as getting this in front of new players. The ease of getting the app is one. You don't have to worry about getting a codex or hunting for the rules or buying some barrier between that. That's one way. We have plans for Slow Grow League. We intend to reveal in January, which will make it very easy for at every step to show the new player through the app what the next step is. So it will teach them how to play with a basic force and then slowly grow up to a larger force. We anticipate that will actually come with some stuff to physically make the game easier to play too, which I'm excited. We can't say yet, but it will be exciting when we reveal that. Lastly, right now we are offering a deal with stores so that when they put in the pre-orders for this game, we're actually providing free demo kits to stores so that the stores will be greatly encouraged to have these demos ready to go in their stores.
Mm-hmm.
So we're really excited to have all these different approaches to bring new players in.
Just an ideal opportunity for people watching this then to reach out to whoever runs your local game store and get them to get in contact with Privateer Press if they want to get it in their store and get these demo kits in there as well.
Absolutely, yeah. We have we have a contact page where you can reach our direct sales, and they can contact them and get a pre-order in and get some free demo kits.
No, we shall pop those relevant details below.
These demo kits do include magnetized full jacks, so people can look at the model and interact with the different arm swaps and see their purchase in hand before actually committing to a box. So it has that advantage as well. Well,
that leads me on nicely then to what are the other big announcements? As if a new edition and a whole new way to play wasn't big enough. The news that you were going to be changing production from, let's face it, what has been the classic metal or resin production format that everybody and their dog in our industry has done since the 1900s and the first flat soldiers were cast.
Sure.
And swapping over to 3D printing from multiple hubs. Have you had to look at any new ways for design to maintain sort of quality of sculpts and consistency when it's not all being run out of your own production facilities? You might have somebody picking one up in France that has never been anywhere near the US. Has that been an issue for you, or has it just been, no, we just design them exactly the same as we always have because we have the background there already?
So right now, the design has changed in the way that has given us more options on how to design minis. Previously, with resin and metal, there's certain things you have to take into consideration that will unfortunately break a model into more parts or make it just uncastable from a certain angle. A main one is like a hand with fingers and having gaps between and all around from all directions.
Yeah.
You just have to fill it. You have to avoid any of the tearing out and ripping of rubber potential, or even just the filling in of bits of tear out from the rubber or any other breakage of those fragile things. Whereas 3D printing, nothing has to interact with those or pull out or anything. They're generated independently. So we can get very dynamic situations that we're still learning to sculpt for because we're just in old practices and old habits. But like trying to...
We can't have an undercut there. It will never cast. And now you're going, oh, well, we can have all the undercuts we want.
That sweeps through where people who had sculpted for us are sculpting the way they always sculpted for us. And it's like, oh, no, you don't have to do that anymore. You can actually go deeper. You can do these things. And trying to reteach everyone after hammering them one way for so long.
Sure.
As far as the opening up or partnering with people across the world, we have had many exciting offers from people around the world as people would love to partner with us.
Sure.
And we're in talks with many right now, trying to hammer out the details. These, of course, will be professional shops, not some passionate individual that wants to help out, but shops that have already been doing professional 3D print cycling and are experienced enough that they can be trusted with files and quality standards, and trying to hammer out all the individual elements of how those contracts will work, and everything will take a little bit of time, but we hope to have it off the ground as soon as possible, because one of the big hangups that we identified as issues with getting our product out is international distribution, especially with the increase in shipping prices post-COVID. It's getting very difficult to get things over there.
Yeah.
And due to the ordering systems of other countries, which we didn't even fully realize till we kept getting complaints and we started evaluating ourselves, what happens is a lot of places, they'll go to their store and say, I would like this item. And the store will be like, you got it. And then they'll tell a distributor, I would like this item. That distributor will save up, put in their monthly order because they don't want things paying for shipping multiple times.
Sure.
And we'll get hit with an order that has a full wave on it, plus 1,000+ items individually. And if we wait till we fill every individual item, the entire wave will ship late and they won't be able to release it close. So we have to just send what we have. And what we didn't realize is that we weren't just shorting the distributor. We were shorting that individual who put in that order at the store that passed it on the distributor. And then they feel like, I don't know what to do. I ordered this thing and they're just not sending it. And when we realized that each order represented an individual in many cases and not just a bulk order of a distributor resupplying, we realized we need to do something to address these individuals. And one of the reasons we chose 3D printing was the ability to allow us to address these individuals better around the world and save them all the VAT fees and different fees,
handling and shipping and
taxes that are applicable to certain countries, not other countries, and also just their concerns where some postage systems when coming from international don't function as smoothly as coming from a more domestic location. And some products simply never make it to people depending on the country. Whereas now we have new avenues to actually put product in people's hands that weren't able to get it previously.
It's fascinating because whenever I've seen it, my initial concern would have been bottlenecking in production, because metal casting, you can chuck ladles of metal into that spin caster every couple of minutes and be ripping them out a few minutes later. And resin is a little slower, but again, faster than 3D printing. But I never thought about it on the grand scale where somebody orders something, it's produced, cured, printed, and then cured, boxed and sent out. Whereas you have an immediacy there as opposed to a larger order coming to you and then all of it having to be fulfilled. And so in some respects, it speeds the process for those restocks, resupplies within specific geographic areas as well.
Not only that, when they're having these big bulk orders, they could be ordering 1,000 different models. You know, that's so when models have 4+ parts, that's 4,000 different molds that need to be prepped, heated, then spun and poured into. And
obviously, we have some stock prepared on shelves, but all the popular items are extremely difficult to keep in stock. And we say popular items, we don't mean 5 things. We mean, those 50 things that get ordered more than other things. And, we will pack 100 of something, and then the shipping guy just takes it all for a single order. And it's like, oh, we have nothing again, as more store orders and retailer orders start coming in for that item. But the casters have moved on to the next thing on the list. And we have such a large library that keeping everything in stock was just untenable. But going in this direction, especially dividing up our production facilities, we hope to relieve some of that burden, because some people imagine 3D printing is as simple as, beep boop, prints the model out.
We've all seen Star Trek.
Right.
Is that not how it works?
Like, overall, it's probably more labor intensive than any of the others to produce the same number of parts. Now, it is cheaper in the material cost. However, the labor cost is underestimated, I think, by many individuals, and how much processing it takes to turn over, clean, prepare these printers and all the individual prints and get them ready and packed, hopefully safely for the customer to get to safely. In that, as you, I know, have been thinking, resin is a different material when it comes out of 3D printer than our traditional resin. There were a lot of concerns about strength and ability to hold up as a normal play experience. And I'll tell you, we went through a lot of different options of resins, analyzing them for different properties. At first, it was like easy. It's like, we know we have to work with something pretty safe because we're going to be processing a lot of these amongst our team across a lot of people and then distributing it, where previously our prints never left the building. We used them for master casting and then archived them. Whereas now a lot more hands would be touching these, a lot more people would be interacting with these, and we have a lot more printers than we were running previously. So at first it was, okay, cut out anything that uses any material that we just don't want to deal with. It has to be something that we can process easily without super waste runoff or without requiring other chemicals that have their own problems in order to clean and interact with. And then it was a lineup of, okay, best detail and best durability. And there were at least 2 that we really strongly looked at because they could go so deep with depth of detail. But really it was at a point of diminishing returns where you've got virtually the same detail of something much stronger, And the advantage was at the cost of it being far more brittle than some of our other options.
Yeah.
So we had to do this checks and balance and evaluation. We arrived on, okay, the safest materials, this one's durable enough and keeps very crisp detail.
Mm-hmm.
And we think we ended up in a really good compromise and balance between all of these things. And since you don't have to model these the same way of scraping mold lines and drilling and interacting with them, some of the slightly more fragile nature compared to our previous resins is offset by the fact that you won't have to be drilling and banging and scraping on these. Mm-hmm. They're virtually ready for table play upon arrival.
Yeah, even the countersinks for the magnets have been designed into the jacks.
Correct.
Yeah, which is something I'm dying to get my hands on to take a look at. I think John has one that was sent out for us to examine, and he immediately grabbed it and ran off cackling into a corner. So I'll have to prise it from his hands like the ring from Gollum, but I will eventually. Before I let you go, we've touched on it a couple of times sort of briefly, but you have mentioned organized play coming in sort of various formats and sizes. Will it be solely for the new Prime arena, or will you also be doing organized play for the legacy players, or is that going to be more a case of that's up to them if they want to continue with it?
So in October, we're going to preview the new Steamroller rules for everybody before they go live. Mm-hmm. And both Prime and Unlimited are going to be supported in that. It will be up to the tournament organizer to decide when they put a new tournament out if they're running Prime or Unlimited. Mm-hmm. And they will also decide what points level it's going to be, because we do really want to see that variance across the board of maybe even different metas are running different point levels. This year, the focus is going to be on 50 points. Mm-hmm. And the new we will have new ways to play at different points as well later on this year. So a lot of different interesting aspects.
Sounds like Mark IV is going to be pretty much a sea change in how we view both the game itself and the accessibility of the miniatures. It'll be fantastic to catch up with you again once it's sort of bedded in the new year, and possibly even take part in that Slow Grow League, because that sounds like something right up my strata. If people want to keep an eye on what's happening with Mark IV, I know they can already download the rules. Is the best place to go to your homepage and check out the news there?
Privateer Press /news, I think, is where we keep our news. You can also just go to our main page and hit the news tab, and you'll see all the new news articles and lore drops we have for Mark IV right now. I think we just released some stuff for Khador yesterday, so tons of cool stuff.
Fantastic stuff. Well, thank you very much for your time. Listen, folks at home, if you have any questions about Mark IV and you want them answered, drop them below and we will pass them across to the folks at Privateer and get you an answer. But otherwise, definitely go and download the cards and the rules. And if you haven't been involved in Warmachine before, now seems like the ideal time to finally get your Jack and caster on the tabletop. Till next time, bye-bye.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.